Welcome to the NNJR Trackside Classroom Series. Today's topic is driving at the limit. This session is really oriented for those of you with a lot of experience. Student drivers, you may find some tips here that you can use, but a lot of this may or may not make sense to you. So you're welcome to watch, but again, we're talking about some techniques and such that may not make a lot of sense if you don't have a fair bit of experience on the track. With that said, as always, we have the disclaimer that we do our best to put good advice out, but you use it at your own risk and with your own judgment. So today we're going to talk about what the limit really means, or how to think about it, and most importantly, how to safely approach it. And we're going to talk about it both from the point of view of the driver and the car. We're going to talk about some important prerequisites, some techniques, and some tips that I hope you'll find useful. So before we dive in, there's a really important first point here, and that is that you really have to know yourself. If you're thinking about going faster and getting a little closer to the limit, there's some important things here from Dennis Mascio, who is the former chief instructor at Bortle Roost School for years, and now the chief instructor at Monticello Motor Club. And he gave a talk on Zoom a little while ago, which you see the link to here, and I strongly recommend you watch it. But I want to emphasize some of the points he made because they're really right on the money. And he says for any driver, fear is real, and you need to acknowledge it. Whether we worry about damaging the car, hurting ourselves, or whatever it is, don't ignore it. Even if others can drive faster, that doesn't mean anything. If we're feeling the fear, it's real, we have to deal with it. And the way we deal with it is to get the driving more rote, as he says. He says driving is an intellectual sport, and as we get better and understand what we're doing, the fear level goes down. And also that consistency reduces fear. So these things are things I'm going to come back to, but they're really the most important point I'm going to make today, and that is we have to sneak up on whatever threshold that we think is there, and we have to do it in a way where we acknowledge that we're taking a risk, and deal with that real fear factor, that real risk factor. So, with that said, let's dive in. So there are limits if we're thinking about driving closer to our personal limit. Let's first think about the things that could get in the way of that. And I've described those here as limits versus the limit. That could be your physical condition, you're tired, or maybe you're just not seated properly in the car. You could be distracted. You could be in a rush. You could just be not prepared. Now, the other side of that same coin is if we're going to be prepared, then we want to be in good physical condition. We want to be seated properly. Our attitude has to be in a receptive frame of mind. We want to be wanting to learn. And then we have to prepare for this session on track. What is our priority? Maybe it's braking, maybe it's a particular corner. And then we want to, whatever that is, we want to visualize what it is that we want to do different, as well as what the baseline is, and I'll say more about that in a moment. And then when we're in the car, we want to be relaxed. We want to be focused on that one priority, with everything else a consistent baseline, because this A versus B is a really important concept, which I'd like to credit to Peter Krause. His point is, we want to try something different because we think that'll make it easier, faster, better, whatever it is. Well, A needs to be our consistent baseline. B is our option. Maybe we're going to brake a little bit later and see if that works. Well, we're going to start by braking at our normal point, A, and we'll do a few laps there. And then we'll brake at our different point, B. We'll do a few laps there and we'll compare them. And whether you compare them with indexing or data or whatever, doesn't matter. The point is you're going to try both and see which one's better. Well, this is how we improve. We have a baseline, we do something different. If we do, and it works, we now incorporate that in our baseline. We practice it until it becomes rote, as Dennis said. And when we're in the car, of course, we want to be paying full attention to our senses. What does the car feel like? What is it telling us? Are we seeing anything different, and so on? So here's a very simple example, but I hope it kind of makes the point. If we're thinking about braking later at turn 1, well, let's see if we're ready. Can we heel and toe consistently if we have a manual transmission? Exactly where is our current braking point, and are we consistent both in terms of where we're braking at the speed we're arriving at? Because if we're not, then experimenting isn't going to do us any good. We need the consistent approach speed and a consistent brake point now. And now let's set the target. Maybe it's half a car length later. Or maybe it's we want to brake a little less, at an 8 instead of a 9. And so to get ready, we visualize what that half a car length looks like, and get it clear in our mind. And then we go out and we get warmed up. We brake at that later point at a reduced speed. Then we pick up the pace and we try it at full speed and see if it works. And if it does, now we can practice it and have a new baseline. If it doesn't work, then we go back to braking at our original point. So that's the A versus B part of this. Now, if you're a driver with limited experience watching this, that may be too much, or you may not be ready for that, because we really need to be consistent. And, whether you're measuring it with time or indexing, your speeds at different points or your RPMs at different points, doesn't matter, but we have to be consistent. Are we approaching, a corner at the same speed every lap? Are we braking at exactly the same point? Are we braking with the same amount of force? Is our end of braking at the same point? Is our transition off the brakes not only smooth, but is that consistent? And so on with the throttle application and everything else. So if we can't answer that we're driving in a consistent fashion like this, then trying to get better by braking later or doing anything else different is a waste of time. We need to get consistent, and to the point where if you're measuring lap times and you have, you consistently run, laps that are, pick a number, 14s, and you run one lap at 13, well, yes, you can say you ran a 13, but not really. If most of the other laps were 14s, your real speed is a 14. And that's what you can do consistently, and improvements need to be measured against 14s in that example, not 13s. So let's take this down a level, peel the onion back a little bit, and talk about which limit are we talking about that you may want to get closer to. Is it a particular corner or a particular segment of the track? Is maybe braking? Maybe you want to improve your braking. Maybe it's the corner entry in cornering and so on. Or maybe it's transitions, whether that's steering, brakes, off the brake, EOB, one of the most important ones. Whatever it is, we pick one, we work on it at one at a time, and we focus on it. And as the slide from Ross Bentley shows, we can kind of try to sneak up on it with this yellow line that's a little hard to see, where whatever the limit is, we're constantly below it and we eventually get there. Or we can do the red line and go way over it and oscillate back and forth. Or if you're really, really good, you kind of get close faster and so on. But whatever it is, the idea is pick one aspect and work on that one aspect. Now, part of peeling the onion is understanding, and particularly when we're talking about cornering or braking for that matter, is understanding tires and slip angles. And this gets a little complicated, but this is an advanced class after all. And it is an important aspect of understanding what's going on with those four rubber things that connect us to the track. So a slip angle, most of you know what it is. It's the difference between the heading the tire makes and the actual heading of the car. And as we're cornering, the tire, is not headed in the same direction as the car. That difference is called the slip angle. And different tires have different characteristics. A street tire has kind of the characteristics of this dashed line on this graph. And whereas a track tire, whether it's an R compound tire or a slick, will have, a steeper, in other words, will corner with less steering input, be more responsive. That's what this steeper curve means. And will have higher limits. Notice there's a big gap here. Now, this is an old graph, and these differences aren't as dramatic today as they were when this was done, but there still is a difference here. And of course, we all like sticky tires because they are more responsive and they have more grip. But now let's take that down a level and look more carefully at this. Is a real slip angle graph from Carroll Smith, and notice how he looks at the top of this curve is where the most grip is in a corner. And so in an ideal world, we'd want the car operating right at top of this curve. Notice he has this biggest box here, and he calls that talent, to be able to drive so that the tire and the car are always operating at the top of this curve. He calls excellence, being able to operate, in this narrower band where it's slightly higher. And he calls genius the ability to operate at this one very small, skinny section, right where the absolute most grip happens to exist. So none of us are going to, all of us should be very happy to calibrate as talent on this slide. And if anybody's doing better than that, then my hat's off. But regardless, the point is that this is what's happening with the tires. Now, he also points out that beginners tend to operate over this whole range of the tire, not using all the grip, sometimes using more than is there, and in any case, over a wide range. Totally understandable, right? The good news is on this part of the curve here, the tire is controllable, predictable, does exactly what you'd expect. Now, he contrasts that with what he calls the idiot driver, who is overdriving and is driving on this part of the curve here. And by the way, if you look at a 4-degree slip angle here, you notice that the grip level is the same as if we go over to here, about 8-degree slip angle. In other words, you can slide the car more and have the same level of grip. However, you're much closer to where this grip completely goes away. And as the slide says, the car is going to have much less predictability. It's going to have a lot more understeer and or oversteer. So I put this up, to give you something to think about is where on this curve are you driving? And most of us all of us would like to be driving in this part of the curve here, and ideally right up at the top. But, it takes a lot of talent and experience to make that happen. But I hope none of us are driving over in here. And if we are, and if we're, more like this beginner where we're not sure, then we need to really pay attention to where it is that we're driving the tires, and are we really using the tires in the most effective way? So here's some questions to ask yourself in terms of how close to the limit are you? Are you using the entire width of the track? Seems pretty basic, but we see lots of drivers with a lot of experience, crabbing in, missing a foot or two or even more on the turn-in point, missing an apex by a foot, and so on. Does the car feel like it's sliding? And sliding here is a misnomer, although that's what most of us use. The slip angle makes it feel like, once we have a significant slip angle, like the car is sliding a bit, when in fact it's just the slip angle of the car. But if you are, approaching the limit, you can steer the car a bit with the gas pedal, with your feet, the brakes and the gas pedal. So if you're doing that, then yeah, you're working the tires. Do you understeer at corner entry? Well, that could be a good thing. If you're right near the limit, you turn in and the car, takes a brief second before it really wants to turn. That could be a good thing. It could also mean that you're simply over driving. So you need to understand the difference. And last but not least, are you scaring yourself? If you are, you certainly passed your own personal limit, and you need to back off and think about Dennis Maschio's comments about how do we sneak up on getting better. So again, here's another simplified example, about how to get a little closer to the limit. In this case, we're thinking about cornering, but it almost is like the braking one before, only focused on slightly different factors. So again, we have to pick a safe corner. And if we think about VIR, not sure there are any. Well, that's not true. There's runoff lots of places. But so let's say it's turn one. It could be turn one at Watkins Glen. There's runoff there. Turn four at VIR. But depending on the track. And is my current driving consistent? In other words, I'm entering at a consistent RPM, exiting at a consistent speed or RPM. Are my current reference points working, and are they consistent? Again, back to, am I understeering at corner entry, meaning, gee, I'm turning the car in, it hesitates and then it turns. Well, that's probably a good thing. If it's more than a hesitation, then we're probably over driving. In the mid corner, does it feel like the car is rotating? Does it feel like the car is really hooked up? And then we can visualize a little bit faster entry speed or a little bit higher cornering force. And to get there, we have to try either a later or lighter brake with the same EOB, to get a little bit more entry speed. Again, if the car's already understeering, that may not work. But we may need to adjust the way we're braking to be able to get in a little bit faster without inducing more understeer. And be aware of what the cornering forces are, thinking about that slip angle graph. And of course, we're not going to really learn about how to drive the car at and over its limit on the track, on the tires, I meant. At least I hope not. That's far better learned at an autocross or a skid pad. And I mentioned all of this in terms of cornering, but I want to close this slide by pointing out that the biggest improvement we can make in any corner typically is being able to get our foot on the floor sooner. If we by working on the entry speed in the mid corner, we mess up getting our foot on the floor, then we've obviously gone backwards, not forwards. On the other hand, if we can get the corner speed, entry speed just right, and that allows the car to rotate a little bit better than it otherwise would, then indeed, we can get our foot on the floor sooner. And that's a good thing. And this is the balancing act as you're thinking about, driving closer to the limit is, can I get that in first half of the corner done in such a way that it sets up the exit better? If I can't, then I need to go back to what I was doing before. So to summarize, driving at the limit starts with the driver, starts with a very consistent baseline. And then if we want to improve, we focus on one item and we measure it with that well-developed seat of the pants. And we can obviously measure it with data too, but a lot of these things, we need to be able to feel as well as look at. If we want to get closer to our limit, we want to do that in small bites, small steps. And that starts with the visualization. And in many aspects, we can practice at lower speed and we can gradually increase. And if you take nothing else away besides the fear comment at the beginning, take away the A versus B. A is our solid baseline that we are currently driving now, a consistent baseline through a particular section of the track. And B is something we want to do different. We want to do something different in turn one or wherever it is. And we think about that in the paddock. We visualize what we're going to do different, whether that's brake later, corner a bit harder, whatever it is. And then we go out, we do a few laps of A, then we go out and after we warm up and do as much practicing as we can at a lower pace, we do a few laps at A, and then we try some laps at B. And if you have data, you can measure the difference. But again, that seat of the pants is going to tell us whether or not B is in fact better than A. And of course, to intellectually help us understand this, being aware of the physics of what's going on with the tires is really helpful, because at the end of the day, we can only drive as well as the tires will let us drive. So with that said, thank you for watching. As always, if you have questions, I'm happy to talk to you anytime at the track. I'm also happy to answer questions via email. You see my email here, gilbert4@rcn.com. Feel free to send me your questions or comments. I always love to hear what you have to say. So with that said, I hope everyone has a great day, and I look forward to seeing you at the track real soon.